Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill sitting here Sunday morning. LSU puts on another statement win, going on the road, playing an Arkansas team that you loved heading into this one. Is a very tricky Arkansas team. And Dill, this wasn't really a competitive football game. And although it kind of showed it was a competitive football game in the third quarter is a one-score game, you never really felt like LSU was in all that much danger. And I think the fascinating conversation to have with LSU is where does LSU stack up in the SEC? Where we went into this week saying, all right, Texas is that clear number one favorite. They showed some massive problems against Georgia. You go look at that Tennessee-Alabama game and say, yeah, Tennessee won that football game, but I don't think you're leaving that football game with a ton of confidence from Tennessee or from an Alabama standpoint. And then you look at this LSU team and say, got off to a bad start. Feel like a lot of people wrote them off after that loss against USC. The trajectory of this LSU team, it's going in the right direction. It's going in the right direction fast. Want to have two different conversations. One, Dill, I want to get into LSU and the landscape of the SEC. But I think more importantly, talk about what we continue to see from this LSU team on both sides of the football. Before we get into it, as always, to the LSU fans, I think it's going to be a blast last couple of weeks of the season for this program. We're going to talk a lot about them. The amount of support y'all continue to show, it's amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, let's start with, I think, the biggest storyline coming out of this week of college football, and that is the SEC is wide open. And although we knew LSU was a dark horse coming into the season, even after the loss to USC, I think LSU has kind of made that transition from a dark horse to a legitimate contender and arguably favorite in the SEC heading down the stretch here in 2024.
I think I picked Arkansas going into that week, and I still wasn't quite a believer in that LSU defense. I think, again, you're starting to see them now. That's 2 straight weeks of really, really good football. And again, certainly the questions were, do they have the personnel to be what Blake Baker wants them to be? I mean, you're really starting to see some guys step up. I thought the safety play yesterday, Major Burns and Sage Ryan, incredible. Sage Ryan especially, I think they've kind of found his home, if you will, at that safety spot. He was making good open field tackles, obviously being a bit of an enforcer in the middle, which is nice to see. And then you still got your real horse in Whit Weeks, who is just everywhere and making plays everywhere. And if they play defense like that, I look at that offense and they showed a more complete game, ran the ball really well. That's a really, really complete team. And again, maybe a team that can really just smash on them and pound the ball in the middle. That's probably the one matchup I still feel like would be a tough one for LSU. But man, their secondary is really starting to step up. I think, again, if they can just be aggressive against that type of team, that I don't think there's teams that I just go into that game and be like, oh, LSU can't.
So my question is, you said, all right, a team that can smash on them a little bit, kind of between the tackles. Do we see a team in the SEC? If we just stick with the SEC right now, what team is really scaring you if you're LSU? There's a lot of good football teams in the SEC, right? Tennessee, Bama, Georgia, Texas, all really good teams. LSU is right there. They're definitely a favorite in this game. And
honestly, to me, the toughest matchup is that Tennessee matchup. I think, again, the way Tennessee, I think, can play offense with that rushing attack, I think could present some problems to LSU. But again, you look, I mean, that quarterback battle, him versus Nuss or Nico versus Nuss, is not really close. Nuss is a much better quarterback. I think LSU can score on just about anyone because they can deal with that Tennessee defensive line and really any defensive line I think they play. So again, I think Tennessee to me looks like their toughest matchup. But I just look, the way Nussmeier is playing, if their running game can kind of get going like the way it did against Arkansas, really complete offense. And then again, you got your defensive players making plays. And even in this game, creating turnovers, making some big high-impact plays, that was just not something they did last year. That can mitigate some of the, maybe shortcomings they have in the interior.
So this question just popped up to me. You look at the landscape of the SEC, and I think you have legitimate concerns for just you have a legitimate question about every team in the SEC. But I look at LSU and say, this is not a perfect football team. I don't think LSU fans are going to get up on a pedestal and say this is a perfect football team, but there's not. They're starting to answer some of the concerns that we had coming into this 2024 season. Do they have the difference makers on defense? You're starting to see some difference makers really emerge for LSU. Now, we're going to get into the LSU defense because I want to dive into kind of what I saw from this defense, but I want to start with this LSU offense. And you kind of noted it. The run game for LSU, It hasn't necessarily been there to start the season, but it's certainly coming on. And we had the conversation about who's going to be the back for LSU. Like, we know we have an offensive line that can run the football, but we're going to need to lean a little bit more on the running backs in this rushing attack without Daniels from 2023. Dill, true freshman Kaden Durham. I don't know if there's been a bigger surprise in terms of a true freshman just breaking out and dominating in the SEC. You look at guys like Cam Coleman at Auburn, you look at Ryan Williams at Alabama, you kind of had a sense they would be pretty damn good true freshmen. Kaden Durham was a guy that we talked about when he committed to LSU. I was a massive fan of this kid coming from Duncanville, one of the fastest players in the 2024 class, but I didn't think it'd be a year one guy. I thought he'd need to put on a little bit more weight, kind of get that SEC physicality going heading into 2024. I was flat out wrong. Dill, Kaden Durham is not just a gadget back. He's a guy that just got 21 carries, went for a 100 yards. I was going to say buck. It was a buck 101 yards, 3 touchdowns. Dill, what stands out to me the most, like this kid's physicality for a little bit of a smaller running back who is a speedster coming out of high school. He's put on some weight, really thick lower half. The contact balance that Kaden Durham plays with, it's second to none right now in the country. LSU's found their running back. We know they have an offensive line. If this LSU team can get that run game going in the back half of 2024, makes this offense just that much more dangerous for LSU.
And that's the big thing for me is I didn't think Nuss played particularly great. I don't
No.
think that passing attack ever really found its footing exactly in that game. And they still make their big plays on 3rd and long. Mason Taylor is still just such an important weapon for what he does for that team. But again, you kind of look, that team was ultimately led for the most part on offense on the ground. And I thought the offensive line, again, moving guys off the ball, and that's a really good defensive front, I think, for Arkansas. They're really athletic. They kind of stunt. And they do a lot of tough things for teams to deal with. And I looked, there were big holes. Kaden Durham, I mean, he snatched that running back room from 2 very good, like John Williams and Jackson aren't playing poorly. It's just Kaden Durham came in. He's just playing awesome. And it's not just like the athletic traits, the contact balance, the physicality he's running with. I mean, really good finding holes, really good acceleration when he finds those holes. Just playing really complete running back for
That's
first.
normally what you see the freshmen struggle with the most is just like attacking the line of scrimmage. Like they're used to just kind of playing some backyard football, especially a guy like Kaden Durham. When you're just the fastest football player on the field at the high school ranks, you can kind of do whatever you want. And you saw him do that going back to his time at Duncanville. The polish he has as a running back, like the field, the attack of the line of scrimmage, knowing when to be patient. It's all really impressive. And you kind of noted it. Like the passing game, it wasn't firing on all cylinders. You scored 34 points. You had 400 total yards against an Arkansas defense that all everybody wanted to talk about heading into this one was Travis Williams on the defensive side of the football for Arkansas, who's done a really good job. Like that's an Arkansas team that largely gave Tennessee a lot of problems a couple weeks ago. LSU was able to get the run game going. That was massive. I think the last thing I want to talk about, we know Garrett Nussmeier can be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC because we've seen it with our own 2 eyes. Dill, what happens, and I don't know when it happens, but if it does and Chris Hilton comes back, that is going to be such a massive addition to this LSU offense where I look at where LSU might be struggling a little bit. I thought Nuss was really sharp in that short intermediate route tree. He was 1 of 7 pushing the football 20 plus yards down the field. Chris Hilton, he's kind of that guy that stretches it vertically. If you can get Chris Hilton back to 100% towards the end of this 2024 season, just inject him into this LSU offense heading into the college football playoffs. Again, that's just another addition to this LSU offense that, I think they can find another gear to heading into the college football playoffs, or at least back half of 2024 here.
And last guy I want to shout out on offense is Aaron Anderson. I mean, I think the way he's playing, like again, you kind of knew he was a good athlete, and when he got the ball in his hands, could be really electric. But he's running some incredible routes. I think he's playing that slot position at an elite level right now, being able to get open, beat man coverage early, and be able to pick up those kind of third downs that, again, you really want your slot to be able to be rely on to be able to do. And it felt like last year that was a lot of Kyron Lacey and Malik Neighbors. Those two really kind of lived in that areas at times. I think Anderson's ability to really take that part of the field over, let Kyron Lacey continue to work the boundary, be able to make more big plays for them and work that deeper part of the field, I think it's really helping this LSU team because now you have him and Taylor who both really, really tough matchups underneath, especially if you want to go man.
Last thing I'll note on the offense, complementary football. Last year, this LSU offense was so explosive. They scored so quick that the LSU defense was bad last year, but it looked even worse because of how fast LSU was kind of playing on offense. 38 minutes of time possession. I think that starts with the run game, like staying efficient with your offense, keeping your defense off the field, keeping the opposing offense off the field. That's another aspect. Like, why is this defense playing better? Yeah, Blake Baker, he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. LSU's also playing some complimentary football. I mean, 38 minutes of time of possession. A lot of those drives were 4 to 6 minutes, 4 to 8 minutes. That's how you put away a team in the second half. It's kind of what we saw LSU do. Now, flipping the sides here to the defense, and we're waiting 10 minutes in to talk about this defense. Biggest thing that came from me, and again, you look at the numbers, elite performance, right? 277 total yards, 3 turnovers. They only ran the football for 38 rushing yards. Incredible performance. The thing that sticks out to me the most, we know Blake Baker wants to bring pressure. He brought pressure on 43% of dropbacks in that game Saturday night. The storyline for me here is that they only gave up plays of over 20 yards twice in that football game. When you can find that, you can toe that line, right? LSU was aggressive early in the season, but they were giving up explosive plays on the back end. If you can be aggressive like LSU's doing and force turnovers and create negative plays, but also not give up the explosive play to the opposing offense, that's how Blake Baker wants to do it. And I thought you saw the epitome of the Blake Baker defense against Taylor Green in Arkansas, where we're bringing pressure, we're impacting the quarterback, but we're not letting Taylor Green get outside the pocket, extend plays, and crush us down the field. If you're LSU, I thought that was the most complete performance from this LSU defense we saw all year, and you're really seeing Blake Baker kind of sink his teeth into this LSU defense. Like, this is kind of how we expected the LSU defense to look heading into 2024.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of what you wanted to see. And again, that was always going to be the question. Did they have the guys to play that type of ball? Like, that was the game you kind of would have wanted. Again, like being able to play aggressive, not give up big plays. Like the maturation of that secondary room in general, I think, has just been really, really impressive. And just developing them at a really high level. Like Stamps is playing so well now. Zy Alexander is really good. We obviously talked about the safety play. It's like those guys are really starting to play the type of ball you needed them to play. And that was like a huge question. It was always like, well, I know how Blake Baker wants to play, and I know he had a couple first-round draft picks or first day two, whatever they were, at Missouri last year, and that obviously was a huge asset. Can LSU kind of repeat that with a secondary that coming into the year, I think, didn't do a ton in the transfer portal, obviously struggled a ton in 2023. So you had the questions, but and they're answering the bell. And whether that's development, whether that's just guys getting better, maturing, whatever's happened, this defense
I
is
think
holding.
it's both, and we talked about this or last week when we were talking LSU after they beat Ole Miss. When you talk defensive coordinators, and you talk coordinators in general, a lot of times it's about schematics. And no doubt Blake Baker's schematics are woefully different from what we saw in 2020, 2023. But another conversation that you have with the new defensive coaching staff is teaching and development and getting players on this roster to become better football players. You're seeing that as well. Like, I think we both really like the scheme and direction of LSU on defense and where they're going, but these players are getting better. Only 63 yards after the catch for Arkansas, we're tackling in space. And again, you're seeing difference makers emerge. Whit Weeks, Braden Swinson coming off the edge. I don't think there's a better – how many better linebackers are there in the country right now than what you're seeing from Whit Weeks?
Maybe none. I mean, Whit Weeks is so good. He's everywhere. I think it's, again, allowing them to be a little bit more flexible with where they line everyone else up because he just patrols so much of that middle. And again, he's kind of covering up, frankly, for a deficiency I still see them having in the defensive tackle spot. That's still not going to be a great position for them. But
when you have an eraser like that, like we're Michigan fans. Like, remember when Devin Bush was just patrolling that second level for Michigan? Like, you can cover up a lot of things when you have a linebacker that is seemingly around the football every single play. I think the bottom line is there's a lot of teams that I don't feel like are making much progression. You know what I mean? Like Alabama, they seem to be going in the wrong direction. Tennessee, I don't know. Texas, certainly, but you look at LSU and say they're getting better every single week. And if you can continue to do
that's a
that,
good point because you got Alabama, like they're not answering the questions we have on the defense every week.
no.
Same problem, still get beaten man coverage, still have guys running wide open on the field far too often. Georgia, that offense still is not looking the way I think you want it to look. Tennessee, Nico's still not playing the way, frankly, he needs to play. And then Texas, now you just have a can of worm or a can of questions, if you will, for them because they just had a cakewalk. So, again, you look, LSU is kind of trending in the opposite direction of a lot of these SEC teams where we know that there are some flaws in LSU. There are undoubtedly so. Like there's some issues, there's some position groups that are a little weak, but they're starting to play better at those groups. And some of these other SEC teams simply are not. Right, same problem week in, week out.
We'll cut it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. This is going to be a fun team to talk about down the stretch of the season. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.